So why aren't roles enough, David?
Well, that's a really good question. The problem with roles is that they are very good at sort of organizing basic authorization checks. That's why role-based access control was invented back in the 90s, but they don't scale. They don't scale to the complexity of the environments that we have today, of the authorization use cases that we have today. They're identity centric. They don't look at the context of the authorization. And oftentimes, what happens if you want to reach the level of granularity that you need for your authorization, you'll end up with something called role explosion. And role explosion is something that's, or explosions are fun in movies, but they're not really fun in real life, right? One good example is if you're a bank and you're operating, 10 branches per state. There's 50 states, so that's 500 branches. You end up with 500 different roles. But the reality, I'm sorry, 500 roles just for the teller role. If you had 10 roles per branch per state, now you're at 5,000 roles. You can see the explosion happening. I even forgot to uh, blow it up. But if you had expressed authorization in terms of the basic attributes, not just the role, so say their role, of course, are they a teller, a manager, a branch janitor, and then maybe their location and maybe even their state location, then you could actually have 10 business roles and then a branch identification number and then a state code. And with that, you could have written authorization that scales. Mark, over to
Yeah,
you.
I think that I definitely echo that. We're just working with. We just wrapped up a proof of concept with someone last week, and they're like, "Oh, we need to get everybody's roles in our system," and everyone on their side was just like, "Oh man, do we have to do that?" Because everyone just has so many. They have too many, hundreds or even thousands of roles, and that was one of the drivers of why they were looking at our solution is to say, "Hey, we understand roles are causing us problems. What can we do to reduce our dependency on them?"
Yeah, another consequence of role explosion is you end up with artificial roles and you don't really know what those represent anymore. And so that creates issues when you want to provision roles, when you want to deprovision roles, and when you want to do access recertification. Matt, if you want to review my entitlements or my roles, and one of them says SAP underscore 123 underscore XYZ, how do you know what that means? So no,
You don't.
not only roles not enough, but they lead to very, very hard to understand situations.
Yeah. I think I'm not supposed to be one of the talkers, but one of my favorite quotes from one of our customers was that, for one, they had about 50,000 employees, and they said they had well over 80,000 roles.
Yeah.
So at that point, you might as well just give each individual their own specific role that dictates who they are, and it becomes almost easier to manage. You end up with a David Broussard role, you end up with a Mark Berg role, which is absolutely crazy. But
I want to say it's very millennial, right? You each get your own role.
yes, uh, but the real challenge there was for them. They say getting started with those first few roles was really easy. Bank teller, bank manager, whatever it might be. But it grows to that point that you were just mentioning, David, where it becomes too much that you don't know what every role is, and that management becomes almost too much.
And then and then just the name of the role gets so long because you're appending so many different factors on the name, location, weight, eye color, all these different things, and it just this adds to the mess.
Yeah.
But yes, let's move on to why they aren't enough, even when you already have too many of them.
Yeah. So if we wanted to group all those reasons, Mark and I, in preparing for this webinar, we kind of came up with these 4 categories. They're not the only ones, right? But number one, segregation of duty challenges with roles, right? If you have static roles, it's hard to do SOD. I have a great example of a customer about 10 years ago. That's actually before you joined, Mark. So it's way back then, where the customer had the notion of a manager and then a sales manager and then a sales rep. This was a retail company. And then they had the notion of a trainee sales manager. So they actually had some pretty decent roles in place. And then sales managers could give commissions to the sales reps, but managers did not get commission themselves. That was the way it was set up. However, the trainee sales manager was normally a sales rep, so could receive a commission. And because they were a trainee sales manager, they also had the right to give commission. And because there was no check in there for lack of being able to do a check, they could actually assign themselves a commission. You see the segregation, the violation of segregation of duty. That particular customer, they realized that mistake, not because they had an IAM review, but because on a monthly basis, quarterly basis, they would do their top salesman based on the sum total of commission. And suddenly they saw this person that had like 10 times as many commission or as much commission as the next. And they were like, wow, we have a star seller. And then when they looked at the person, they realized, oh no, they're cheating. They're assigning themselves commissions that they shouldn't have assigned themselves. Had they had dynamic SOD, they could have written something along the lines of, if you're a sales manager or a trainee sales manager, you can assign someone a commission unless they are you. Right? So you could have done that relationship check and prevented that commission from happening.
Yeah, and I think that segues straight into, like, in my opinion, the biggest thing about roles is they can't describe a relationship.
Yep.
So like a role says, "Hey, you're a sales manager," and then in a legacy system, then downstream you assign permissions to that role, um, and that's part of the reason why we get role explosion. But if you wanted to say, "Hey, I want the owner of a document to read something," or a doctor can only view the medical records of their patients, that's what we mean by relationship here, right? There's something about the user that relates them to the resource, whether they're the owner of it, they're on the same team, they're in the same region. So a lot of times that becomes, hey, the user's email address is the same as the owner field on the medical record, and a role can't do that. Um, Otherwise, you'd be creating literally millions of roles, billions of roles.
Yep.
If you got millions of documents, you've got millions of roles to define the owner of each one, and you would just never be able to keep up.
And that leads us right into the scale challenge, which we already talked about, right? The role explosion issue, that to get the level of granularity that you need, you're tempted to create yet another role in your IAM system or your governance system, and you end up with, Matt, what you said about the customer earlier, that ratio of 1 to 8 in their case. I've heard 1 to 10, one employee to 10 roles. That's just crazy. And then to wrap it up, we have context. The inability for roles to account for context, the fact that roles are so egocentric, they only look at identity data and nothing else, right? Mark, you've seen context play out with customers. Like, what was the biggest thing that roles could not address?
Well, there was, I'll say, time, not just like time of day. Like, hey, you can only access something during your shift,
Mm,
say during a customer service representative, right? They have access to sensitive information, but that's a 24/7 operation. Um, and you want to make sure that they're only accessing that information during their shift. And then there's been other cases where, um, I guess I can say it had to do with a casino. And, if you were a high roller, you could access the high roller room and bring one guest in with you, but the guest had to enter within 10 minutes after you did. Uh, so that's another area where we used time and date and time date durations within our policies.